Our guest today on Dashing Dan's Olympic Adventures had an outstanding career as a middle distance runner for Australia, whether it be 400 metres or 800 metres. Went to 3 Olympic Games. She won an indoor world championship as well. She performed really well at the Commonwealth Games. 3 gold medals in the relays in back-to-back Commonwealth Games. She's a very successful coach and an outstanding commentator, one of the best I think we've ever had as an expert commentator when it comes to athletics. And she's heading off to be part of the Channel 9 coverage in Paris with Gerard Whateley, who'll be calling the athletics for the first time. It's a great pleasure to welcome Tamsyn Lewis Manou, or just Tamsyn Manou nowadays. Tamsyn, welcome. Good to have you with us on Dashing Dan's Olympic Adventures for Aussie Home Loans.
No, I'm so glad to be here, Dan. Thanks for having me on.
Tamsyn, why athletics? I suppose with your mother and father being in it, it made it easy, didn't it?
Well, actually, because they'd had so much disappointment in the sport themselves, they tried everything to keep me out of it. But genetics, right? Good genetics. And I remember in primary school when you'd have your races to try and get into the school team, I used to beat the boys. And so anything where you're good at it, I think as a kid you start to like. And for me, I was a skateboarder at the time. I never did little athletics, but because I could win when I did the sprinting races at primary school, I thought this isn't too bad and just kept at it.
And your parents then encouraged you?
Yeah, always. You know, I think they understand that if you, as a child, are doing something healthy that's sport related, they were always 100% behind me and supporting me, but they understood there was going to be a lot of ups and downs because that's what happens with elite sport. It's not an easy journey, but I think it was very handy having parents that understood the sport. It helped me stay grounded when I could have gotten cocky, I guess. And then it also helped, they helped pick me up when I had disappointments.
They had a lot of disappointments, as you said.
Yeah.
I mean, some would think it's not disappointment. Your mother was a 6-time national high jump champion in this country. Didn't go to an Olympic Games. I'm still trying to work out how that could happen. Maybe it's still the Athletics Australia selection policy, which I reckon still dogs the sport nowadays. We'll get to that shortly. And your father made the semi-finals at the 200 metres, which of course was that controversial race with Tommy Smith, Johnny Carlos, and the great Peter Norman, late great Peter Norman, finishing second. Semi-finals and Olympic Games in 200 metres. Pretty good effort.
It was a great effort. So Dad won his heat. So he used to play football as a teenager, and his dad, who played for Richmond, a few games for Richmond, said it's a bit of a rough game. And so Dad stuck with his sprinting, and I think after about 2 years of training under the late great Neville Silito and alongside Peter Norman, he made an Olympic Games at the age of 21 and won that first heat, and then was second in the quarterfinals. And then the semi-final, he finished 5th. He was just behind, I think it was like 0.04 of a second behind a West German athlete. So they took top 4 and he missed that final. So he finished 9th at those Olympics. And we know what Peter Norman did to get a medal there and run super fast time. So Dad was in and amongst greatness when he sprinted at Olympic Games. And then 4 years later, there was a lot spoken about how they didn't send a sprinter after they'd been so successful in 68 to those 72 Olympic Games. They focused a bit more on Peter Norman, but in that 200 meters national title, my dad was the one who won it. And Peter Norman finished 3rd. I think Gary Eddy might have been in 2nd, but don't quote me. And so, yeah, Dad, I think, was pretty unlucky to not go to 72 Olympics when he would have been in his prime.
I would have thought if you have the best performance time-wise, isn't it a simplistic way of looking at it, but a good way of looking at it? If you produce the best performance in the national championships, you just go, Tamsyn, don't you?
I agree. And I think that's the wonderful thing about our sport at the moment. We're sending big teams and we're trying to send as many athletes as we can to represent Australia and wear the green and gold, because in a sport like track and field, you actually don't have a lot to offer the athletes who perhaps don't have the big sponsorship dollars. And the best thing that they can get is representation at Olympic Games or a World Championships or a Commonwealth Games, because that's what you work so hard for. So there's always, you know, in sport that those stories where athletes are littered with disappointment and unjust things happen and politics come into it. But I think back in the day, there was quite a lot of unfairness that occurred. And unfortunately, my parents were 2 of those athletes that probably look back on their athletics career and have a lot of disappointment. So luckily, they've never focused on the bitterness and they've moved forward from that. But having looked back, and I love the history of my sport, I know the athletes who have made teams and the ones who perhaps missed out and could have possibly have been there.
How'd your mum miss out? You're
Well,
allowed to
mum
talk
was
about that.
unlucky as well because there was
Mm.
quota on teams that had to be selected, and mum was she went to a Commonwealth Games when she was just 16. She actually scissor kicked, if you can believe, 173 at the
Wow.
age of 16 and went to those Commonwealth Games in Perth, and she was fantastic junior. And in 1968, she won the national title in the high jump as well. And she won it also again. I think she might have been silver in 1972 nationals. And so, but she didn't get to go to either of those Olympics. In 1964 Olympics, she was the bronze medalist behind a famous high jumper for Australia, Michelle Brown, and Robin Woodhouse. And Michelle Brown went to those Olympics, and so did Robin. And so they both made the final. So Michelle won a silver medal in the final, a fantastic high jumper. So I think mum was pretty unlucky. She can count herself very unlucky to not be able to call herself an Olympian. For me, I think she was brilliant. So I always I don't focus on the fact that she didn't get to go to the Olympics. To me, she won 6 national titles in the high jump, and that's an incredible effort.
Oh, it's outstanding. I mean, there's not too many others that can boast that sort of outstanding performance. Not that your mother would boast either, Tamsyn. While I've got you, and while we're talking about selection processes and criteria, let's fast forward from 1968 to 2024. So 56 years. Lisa Waitman was a chance of going to her 5th Olympic Games in the marathon.
Yep.
And she produced a better time than Jess Stenson. Take nothing away from Jess. She runs a great marathon 6.5 months after giving birth to her first child. So full credit to her. But is it not better, with the greatest respect to Jess Stenson, to allow the person who's got the better time, even if it's in a different event, to go to the Olympic Games?
It's so super hard. The US Olympic team, they actually do a trials for their marathon to try and take out this subjectivity, because every course is so different, isn't it? You know, and conditions come into play. I know that when Lisa ran her fastest time, she didn't have great weather conditions either. So and courses are different. Some are flatter, some are hillier. And in a long distance race, you can get into a pack and settle in and have better competition to push you through. And you don't get that opportunity to the next week. Like if you're a 100-meter runner and you don't have a good race, you can race the week after. So the marathon, you really have to set yourself up to try and make sure that you really target one marathon and really hit it hard. I think Lisa Waitman can count herself extremely unlucky to not be on the plane to Paris, and she is devastated, as she should be. It's a hard one to talk about because all the athletes for Australia who tried to qualify for those 3 positions in the women's marathon, they're incredible, Dan. They're so good. And even for me, it's really hard to speak ill of any of them, because I would love to send them all, because I think they'd all put up a great performance. Unfortunately, that's sport. You can only pick 3. And it's an interesting choice that the selectors went with. They certainly did go left field, because you could have easily have just gone with the top 3 times, which would have made it a lot less subjective and easier for them in terms of the ramifications that's hit them. But I guess they went with the fact that selectors' discretion was in that selection policy, and they chose to use it. I guess time will tell if it's the correct decision, but I think for poor Lisa sitting at home, it'll always be one of those ones where she'll never know what she could have produced when she's over there. For me, who's going to be calling it, I'm certainly going to be calling positively the 3 athletes who are out there performing for Australia, because I think all 3 of them are fantastic athletes. They've been great servants of the sport of track and field. And they're not done yet. So yeah, it's one of those ones for me. It's hard to sit there and watch, because I roomed with Lisa Waitman in 2008 Olympics. She's an incredible athlete. She's had an incredible journey. Her first Olympics in 2008 at nearly 30, and then she was trying to get to her 5th Olympics. What an amazing athlete. And even without this Olympic Games, I hope that a lot of people speak very highly of Lisa Waitman, because she's had an incredible career.
Would she go again? If she was to go to LA, I think she'd be around 50, would she not?
Well, you know what? I would have usually said no, but you look at the athletes like Sinead Diver, and another athlete who missed out that breaks my heart, Eloise Wellings. I think she's got a lot more to give as well. I thought she looked fantastic in that Valencia marathon where Jen Gregson ran so well. And I think she's got more to give in this event. I feel like, you know, if Jess can do that 6 months after having her second child, she's got more to give. I just think we've got such talent. And I haven't even mentioned Izzy Bat-Doyle, who thank goodness has qualified in another event, so she gets to go to Paris. But she's still relatively young in this event, and she could do great things in the marathon. So we've just got such strength in women's distance running at the moment. It's exciting, but it's also heartbreaking when it comes to picking a team.
Tamsyn Lewis is our guest on Dashing Gans Olympic Adventures for Aussie Home Loans. They deal with anyone in Australia. They've got clients in every state and capital city. And like Tamsyn and I are doing, and how I do most of my interviews, we can speak to you, or they can speak to you via Zoom. So how do you think Australia will go? We're sort of going back to front here, considering you're going to be the expert commentator alongside Gerard Whateley, Dave Colbert. I noticed the team came out yesterday, the Channel 9 commentary team. So congratulations to yourself and everyone who've got a Guernsey. I'm green with them. I've been to a few myself, and it is a great experience as a broadcaster. But how do you think Australia's going to go on the track and field?
I'm so excited about the Australian track and field team. Being in Budapest at the World Championships in 2023. So last year was so exciting for the Australian athletics team. We walked away with 6 medals, which is an incredible effort. And I think the buzz around our team has been pretty exciting, that the fact that we'll go into these Olympics with a lot of medal chances. And we haven't been like that for so long. You know, the strength is actually, you know, when you talk about a team going into an Olympic Games having the possibilities of medaling, it's kind of a lot of the times with Australia being, I hope we medal. You know, I hope these athletes get on the podium and I hope they do well. And we've always had, you know, the Steve Hookers that go in as a favorite, or a Kathy Freeman, a Sally Pearson. They've been the favorites and we've focused on them. But in this team, there's a lot of medal chances. There's a lot of athletes that, you know, Jemima Montag in the walk. And, you know, you've got Matt Denny. He's just missed that podium so often. He's been in 4th. And I think this could be his Olympic Games where he does hit the podium. Our pole vaulters are brilliant. You know, Curtis Marshall, he's been a little bit injured, but he knows how to perform well on the world stage. Nita Kennedy was great last year. And Dr. Mackenzie Little, wasn't she fantastic at those world champs where she got on the podium? And that's without mentioning Olympian Kelsey Lee Barber, who medaled last Olympics. And if she gets onto one, which she so often does, especially in the last round, keeps us all on the edge of our seats. She's a chance as well. Women's high jump, Nicola Olaslagers and Eleanor Patterson, both on the medal rostrum last year. It's unheard of to have 2 Australians in the same event up on the podium at a global championship, but they've done it. And can they do it again? So, you know, long jump hit, we've had Chris Matreski at the national championship show that he's a medal contender, and Brooke Stratton is brilliant as well. And if she can jump over 7 meters, which she's done in the past, then she's a medal chance. So on the track, Jess Hull has been going so well in the middle distance ranks. And I love that she's focusing on that 1500 meters. I feel like she's really worked on her armory. She's got so many little things now in her toolkit that she can call on. She's got a kick. She's strong if it's a fast pace. She looks like she's loving that 1500 meter when she runs it, which I don't know how she can possibly do that, because the pain that must be going through her body as she runs around at that pace must be incredible. But fantastic athlete. And I'm just interested in seeing how we select our team, because the middle distance ranks in men and women, it's just going to be like that women's marathon team, which you see 3 great athletes make it, but you also will see great athletes miss the team, which will just be heartbreaking for them as well.
Do you think, Tamsyn, that we'll ever change the selection policy away from selectors' discretion and have the top 3? I know you spoke about, and I think it's the best way of going, that if you're going to have a runoff, if you like, try and have all these competitors in the one marathon, all in the same conditions. Now, it's very hard. It's been hard for the women, because Jen Gregson's only just started in the sport, and she went and had a child, and she's come back. And we've spoken, of course, about Jess Stenson having her 2nd child. But do you think we'll ever get away from selectors' discretion and just pick the best times?
I mean, I've always loved the US trials, and I've sat there and I've watched them over the last couple of weeks as they've played out, and the drama of them is just, I think it adds to the entertainment. People want to go and watch those trials because they know that something really is on the line every time the US national championships take place. I would love to see it, just because I think that it does take away that selector's discretion, and I think that's the fairest way to do it. We haven't really needed to do it much in the past because we haven't had the depth that we're having the issue with now. And the other thing that makes it more difficult than the US and Great Britain and those other Northern Hemisphere nations is that we run our nationals earlier in the year, and that leaves a lot of time from that March sort of April moment until when the global champs are on. I think the only way it would work would be if you did what we did for Sydney Olympics and you made the athletes come back and had that trial closer to the championships time, and that would mean having it run at a, probably in one of the warmer states of Australia in a time where it would suit. But it is tough. It is tough because athletes would then have to try and afford to be able to come back. And the athletes who perhaps are just on their way up, we'd have to put meets on around the country that would be out of season. So there's a lot of things that would need to be talked about to make sure that it was feasible and it could happen. But I would love to see just some of that selectors' discretion taken out of the chat. And I think some of the selectors would probably prefer that at the moment too, because they've got a really hard job coming up selecting this team.
No doubt. It's great that we've got so much talent. It just seems, Tamsyn, at the moment that there's more talent than we've had. There's more depth than we've had, which is a great credit to all the coaches around the country, including your good self, Melinda Gainsford-Taylor, who'll join me on the show tomorrow. So it's fantastic, isn't it? Why do you think athletics has picked up so much?
Well, I like to think it's because Athletics Australia has started picking bigger teams. I think when you start to pick bigger teams, athletes can sense that they've got that chance to make a team if they finish in the top 3 and are qualified with either the qualifying time or in the quota that World Athletics sets with all the other nations competing. So I think it's got something to do with that positivity around Athletics Australia really starting to select those teams, and that snowball effect is that the team's more positive. Athletes feel like the federation's backing them a little bit more. And I think that just then flows on to the next generation. Also, seeing our athletes doing so well, I think when little athletes see and our athletes performing well, and then Athletics Australia bringing them back and making sure that our athletes are, they're representing themselves and our sport so well. They're going down to those little athletic centres. They're being able to chat to athletes at events that we put on around the country through the domestic season. I think that it's just becoming a little bit more popular again. I think with other sports that are, big in Australia, like football, soccer, you're starting to realize that to be good at some of those sports, the athleticism that's required is also important. So, you see a lot of our AFL footballers before they get drafted practicing some running skills, and they start to then learn and love the sport of track and field. So they'll watch it at the Olympic Games, they'll watch it at Commonwealth Games, they'll have a bit more respect for it. So, and I love that the media is starting to talk a little bit more about our stars. And I just think that if the more role models we've got, the more sort of headlines like we had going into Sydney Olympics with Kathy Freeman and the athletes that we had performing well there. I think that flow-on effect is that juniors see it and start to want to try the sport.
Tamsyn Lewis Manou is my guest on Dashing Dan's Olympic Adventures for Aussie Home Loans. Areas of expertise include purchasing a property, owner-occupied or investment, building a property portfolio, refinancing, debt consolidation, cash out, and first home buyers, equipment loans, car loans, and personal loans. Well, I've got a friend of mine whose son has been trained by you, Tamsyn, and they said you're absolutely fantastic in being able to, as you said, give these young men and women Carey Grammer's the school that this young fellow's been involved in, Charlie and his brother Will. I'm sure John doesn't mind me mentioning their names. Bad luck, I've mentioned them now. That they said that it's given them more of an interest in the sport, and they're more enthusiastic about the sport than they have been in the past. So that's a tick for you, but no doubt a tick for all the coaches that are taking a similar sort of attitude in their coaching.
I mean, athletics needs good coaches. We do need a lot more to be out there, because it's not like some of the other sports where they pay big dollars for the coaching. A lot of the coaches are doing as volunteer roles. But no, I love coaching within schools. I enjoyed coaching Charlie and Will and their sister Tess as well.
Yes.
Like, they're brilliant, absolutely brilliant attitudes that they bring to training. They're a lot of the kids at schools they're doing a lot of other sports, and they understand that the better their running gets, the more it helps their other sports. But the positivity that they bring and the willingness to learn a sport that's pretty tough sometimes in athletics, where you have to put yourself out against other opposition and let that vulnerability be on show to your schoolmates. It's a good skill to have, not just for wanting to become an elite athlete, but just in life in general. So I enjoy seeing young kids being healthy and learning to not only love sport, but also really feel like that they have a place within sport, whether it's at an elite level or just participation level. I think it's important for our youth of today.
As you know, I've been in the media a long time, and I've heard a lot of great experts. And even just because I'm talking to you today, Tamsyn, for Dashing Down's Olympic Adventures for Aussie Home Loans, I don't think I've heard anyone better in regard to athletics. You obviously know the sport well. You do your homework. You had some interesting battles with the media during your career, but you're a natural at it. I mean, obviously, as soon as you got into the media, you'd forgotten about that. But how tough was it at times being criticised as maybe being an underachiever when it is a very, very tough sport, middle distance running?
Yeah, actually that probably hurt. The underachiever tag hurt a little bit just because I knew that I was trying my best. And I think at the end of the day, that's all you can ask of any of our athletes is that they go out there and they try their best. You know, looking back, if I'm like anyone, I think there'd be changes that I'd make myself, and I always would look in the mirror and say that I could do things better if I had my time again. But I always tried hard. You know, I gave a lot to my sport, and I put a lot of effort into the training track, and I sacrificed a lot in terms of going overseas and trying to make it work and be the best athlete that I could be, not only for myself, but when I was representing our country. But, you know, I would change things as well. So there's things that the media said that perhaps if, you know, I'd been a little bit more mature, I could have looked at and made those changes. But at the time I was young and I went about my sport the way that I thought was the right way. And I certainly can always put my head on the pillow and sleep well and know that I went about my athletics just really giving everything that I had and doing the training that my coach set all the time. And sometimes to the detriment, I would go even harder and not like to rest more than I probably should have. But yeah, it's an interesting one. And now I do work in the media. I think it's been really good for me to be on this side of the fence because I have that empathy for the athletes when they're in the position at a major championship where it doesn't go their way. And I feel like it's a lot easier for me to then tell their story in a compassionate way rather than just saying, well, they're not good enough.
I remember the photo shoot back in 2004. It was described by the media as racy. I thought that was very harsh. Now, you're on a hiding to nothing. You obviously didn't go as well as you would have liked at those Olympic Games. If you've gone really well, they would have said, oh, how good is it for the sport? So to me, I didn't think it was an issue. Were you hurt by that, by those comments?
I learned early days from my parents actually to never read the paper and listen to what other people said that weren't in my support network. And I was really strong with that, really strong. And so I was always okay because my parents and my family and my support network picked me up if I wasn't happy. The hardest critic to deal with was always myself. So for 2004 Olympics, I was shattered because after 2000 Olympics, my trajectory was meant to go a certain way. I'd done so well. I'd just missed that Olympic final. A home Olympics, I was ninth, missed the final by 3/100ths of a second. There were drug cheats in that race, so it would have been lovely to have had that opportunity. But I just assumed that I'd make that final and win a medal at 04 Olympics, and it didn't go that way. I got a hamstring injury because I was probably doing too much. It was an overuse injury. So it certainly wasn't a lack of trying to win that medal. It was just I made mistakes in terms of the way that I went about my training. I had two English coaches at that point and I needed to go over and train in the UK. And if you ask me today, knowing with work and where I was going to end up, if I would do photo shoots again, I possibly wouldn't because it's not my style. I wouldn't want to be front and center in the media if I went back and had my career again. I would want to be front and center in the media for the right reasons. And so I probably wouldn't do it if I had my chance again, but it did pay the bills and get me overseas to compete and try and chase my dream. And having said that, it didn't pay off. 04 it was an Olympics that broke my heart and I wasn't good enough. But that harsh reality and that ability to bounce back and learn from my mistakes, that's probably what I'm the most proud of when I look back on my career as an oldie. I sit there and I go, well, the disappointments hurt and they hit me, but I didn't quit. I got back up every time. Every time I got back up. And that's the only reason why I got to stand on the podium in 08 in Valencia at the World Indoors. And that moment was really special. And it was worth all the hard yards. And it was worth the disappointments because that's the only way I learned.
Did you ever think of quitting the sport at the highest level after 2004? Or I know you a little bit, I would have thought, and you've just virtually discussed it now, it made you more determined to keep going.
I think it's in my nature. If it doesn't work, work out a way to make it work and just try again. Just keep trying. I think that was the hardest bit at the end of my career. I found 2012 Olympics when I wasn't picked the hardest point of my career because I was so ready to retire in 2012, but I wanted to retire at those Olympics. And then when my federation didn't back me and pick me, that's the most disappointed I've ever been because I didn't have an end point. And then I just sort of needed to keep going to try and erase the negative memories. And that's what I always did. If there was a negative memory, I would get back up, do the training, focus on that, and then move on. So 04 was okay. I got back and I had to really go backwards to go forwards. I had to change my training. I had to fix my technique because I had that hamstring injury and it took a couple of years. But it was worthwhile because I was still young enough and I could see that end goal. I could see 08 Olympics and I could see 2012 Olympics and I knew that there was more. When you get to the end of your career, that's where it gets a bit tougher.
How tough was it to constantly be concentrating on the 400 and 800? I know the 400 was important for the relays, and you won 3 Commonwealth Games gold medals with some outstanding runners as well. I mean, try and pick better runners than Lauren Hewitt, Nova Peris, Tamsyn Lewis, and Jana Pittman in the same team. Kathy Freeman, we'll get to her shortly. Brilliant runners. And then, of course, concentrate more on the 800 as your individual event. That would have been pretty tough, Tamsyn, I would have thought.
Yeah, I think I chose 2 of the hardest events on the track, but I would never change that. I possibly was more of a 400-meter runner naturally. And the issue with that was that in 1999, I was training with Kathy Freeman, and I like winning. I really love to win. I couldn't have cared less about times. Generally, it was always about trying to win the race. And I looked at the nationals, actually, it was 98. I looked at the national field and I knew that there was going to be an athlete called Kathy Freeman in the 400 and the 800 was open. So I turned to my coach, who was our coach at the time, Peter Fortune, and I said, right, I'm going to run the 800. And I hadn't done the training for it, but I was like, I'm not going to win the 4, but I reckon I can win the 8. And so then I did win the 800 with hardly any 800 training. And then the die was cast and I became an 800-meter runner. But I was possibly more of a 400-meter runner. It felt more natural to me when I ran it. It was probably one of those things where I just got it a little bit easier. I was a sprinter as a kid. Gun goes, you run fast, you know, whereas the 800 and the tactics, I had to learn all of them a little bit more. And often I'd have to go out quite fast and didn't have that finishing strength that a lot of the 1500 runners had. So, yeah, no, I loved both events. I loved the tactics. I loved how much I had to work hard to run a good 800. But I did enjoy the 400 meters.
Tamsyn Manou has joined me for Dashing Down's Olympic Adventures, 3-time Olympian, 3-time Commonwealth Games gold medalist in the 4x400 metre relays. And we're here for Aussie Home Loans. They've got over 25 lenders on their panel. So back to 2000, you just missed the final, didn't you? I mean, I'm probably going to ask a silly question here, Tamsyn. I'm prone to do that. Could have you done any more to get in the final, considering you just missed by, well, certainly a lot less than a second, wasn't it? 3/100th of a second or something, wasn't it?
We won't mention the bee's anatomy part, will we? No.
No, I was trying to come up with something that Rex Hunt used to use that started with a P, but I thought I'd better not a 15th. I'll say it. Yes.
No, 3/100ths of a second. You know, every Olympics before that Olympics, they'd gone top 4 in the semifinals, you know, and I finished 4th in my semifinal. It was the first semi. The second semi saw it. They went a bit faster in the first lap. No, I ran that over and over in my head. Still struggled to watch that race. But there wasn't anything I could do. I ran a really, really good race, really good tactical race. And, you know, I came into that front straight and I was in those qualifying positions. I just couldn't hold on. But I ran all the way through the line. I beat quality athletes. But it was heartbreaking. And I'll always remember walking underneath the stadium because I couldn't watch the next race and just hands in head sitting in the gutter under the stadium and hearing the collective sigh of 100,000 people in that crowd when they looked at the scoreboard and saw the time and realized that I'd missed by 1 spot. It was beautiful. They really rode that journey with me, and I don't think I stopped crying for at least a good 2 hours after it, and I was devastated, and I still struggled to watch that race, but I ran well. I did as well as I could, and at the end of the day, you know, that's how I coach. I say you bring what you can on the day and you do as well as you can. You've got to be happy with what you deliver, and I did it through good, honest, hard work. So it was all I could give.
I mean, your husband, Graham Manou, former Australian Test cricketer and South Australian cricketer, I'm sure he would say when he coaches people as well in his sport that if you get a good delivery, you get a good delivery. There is nothing you can do about it. But if you play a bad shot, well, that's your fault. But if you run as well as you possibly can, Tamsyn,
Yep.
there's not much more you can do, is there?
Yeah, I love that in cricket. You know, there's going out in different ways. You could go out on the same score, but if it was an amazing ball, you're like a little bit less disappointed than if it was a, you know, a sweep shot and you've been bowled, right? So,
Yeah, correct.
no, it's the same thing. And I think in sport and in life, you can't look in the rearview mirror. You just can't. You can't hold on to any bitterness. And you have to learn from your mistakes and you have to move forward. And you have to be proud of the effort that you put in. You've always got to find a silver lining, a positive from it. And I think I do that okay.
Can I ask you about Jana Pittman? Do you get
Oh,
on now?
of course. Yeah, good old Yana. She's what an athlete. She's brilliant.
Yeah.
And honestly, contrary to all media reports, Yana and I get along fine. I'm happy to have a conversation. If Yana walked past me in the street, I'd be the first one to cross over to the other side, give her a hug and have a great chat with her because we're in relay teams together. We share life experiences that are so big, you know, and I think as you mature and you get older, you start to understand how important those moments are in our lives. And so, yeah, no, and she's done some wonderful things, some brilliant things on the track. I feel sorry for her that she didn't get to achieve what she wanted to, but I hope that she understands how good she was to be a double world champion in the 400-meter hurdle. She is an incredible athlete.
Well, we've had Debbie Flintoff-King on our program for Aussie Home Loans. And of course, her husband, Phil, coached Jana. Yeah. And not long before she did her meniscus, she broke the world record in a training run, Tams. And that's how well she was going leading up to 2004. And I don't think that if she had been 100%, there's no way anyone would beat them. I mean, we're not to know that now, are we? But, I mean, she was just ready to go, according to Debbie.
And she still made the final after all of that. Incredible athlete. And that's why I say I know she was disappointed because she really wanted the Olympic gold, but she's got 2 world championship golds. She's brilliant.
Can I ask you about your indoor championship in 2008? Obviously, your crowning glory. Gee, I hope your throat gets better. You've got a lot of work to do in Paris in a few weeks' time. Looking forward to hearing you on Channel 9 with Jared Waitley and the crew. Can't wait for the Olympics, just a few weeks away now. But winning that indoor championship, what did it mean to you?
Everything. It made the hard work worthwhile. Definitely. You know, as an athlete, I made my first Australian team in 1994. And so from 1994 to 2008, to get that individual gold medal and stand on the podium and hear my anthem, it's a lot of hard work that goes under the bridge to get to that point. And I had incredible support behind me. And for me, standing on that dais, it was wonderful to be able to reflect in how many people were genuinely on my side at that moment, you know, and throughout the years. And they were all so happy for me. It's such an individual sport at times when you stand on that line with nothing but your thoughts. But wow, it's a team sport. And that's the best thing about athletics. You get to choose your team and the people who you take along for the journey with you. And for me, I've been so lucky. And to have that moment to share with them was just wonderful.
So I take it because it was an indoor event, you did a lot of indoor training. Can you take us through the sort of training you did? And this is probably a very silly question, but I'm prone to that, as you know, Tamsyn. What was the training like compared to if you're training for an outdoor meet? Is it much different?
You're not going to believe this. I literally didn't train on the indoor track at all.
Wow.
So I, the week before I was in Australia running our national championships, I won the 400 and 800. And then on the Monday, I got on a plane, I think, to go to Europe. I was jet lagged round 1 because my first race was the Friday. I'd only arrived in on the Tuesday. The Saturday semi-final, I felt a little bit average. And then I think my coach told me when I made the final, because I was in great shape. You could be in great shape on the outdoor track and run well indoors. It's a bit different, but it suited me because it's hard to get around on the bends. And being a quicker 800-meter runner, I could use my speed to make sure that I was in good positions. The final just got run really differently to the way that it had been in all the major championships that I'd been at before. It was slow. It was really slow. And they were racing against each other because I was not even talked about. And then it just came down to a finishing, you know, sprint. And because I hadn't used any of my bickies because it was so slow, I was able to show the sprinter side of me. And I was able to hold off Maria Mutola, who won Sydney Olympics, and the other athletes that were the ones who were more fancied to win the gold medal. And I think the funniest bit was I literally did not have the flag. They didn't have the Aussie flag ready to go. I think they had it ready for Steve Hooker because he was pole vaulting, but like they didn't expect me. So I walked around with a drink bottle in my hand and sort of in shock, not knowing what to do until Steve was on the back straight pole vaulting. And I think he came across and high-fived me and woke me out of my stupor. And I was like, oh my goodness, did that just happen? And yeah, it was fun. It was fantastic memory to have, but I certainly didn't do any training on the indoor track before it. It was just one of those things where I think the indoor stadium and the speed of being banked and the short bends suited me.
That's absolutely fantastic. I would have thought you would have done a lot of training, but maybe that's the key in a lot of things, Tamsyn, like exams as well. Maybe, well, I don't want to discourage people not to study or young children not to study, Tamsyn, but maybe less is more at times.
Well, I'd done the training, and that was the main thing as a runner. I'd done the training. It's kind of also almost like a track's a track. It's just the opposition lifts you, and it's how you react to the event. And for me, my coach, who was my brother, he'd said to me in the final, just put yourself in a winning position at the business end of the race. And that's what I did. So I owe it to him.
What was that dynamic like? I mean, you had Daley Thompson, you had Seb Coe, two of the all-time great athletes as your coaches. You mentioned Peter Fortune, who coached Kathy Freeman, great coaches. And then your brother took over. Did the dynamic work? Obviously it did.
Yeah, no, I was so lucky. I had such great coaches, and I'm good friends with all of them still, which is fantastic. They've been great mentors for me and all given me such great experiences in my life that I can take forward with me in other things that I do. My brother coaching me was the best. I think he got the most out of me because he really got me. And he was such a great coach. Honestly, he was such a good coach. We're talking about the person who's also grown up with athletics, mum and dad. Yeah. He's got their genetics as well. So he did athletics as a kid, and he just really understood it, loved it, and was able to get the best out of me. And I owe most of my career to him.
Now, in 2008, obviously you were cock a hoop after your performance at the indoor champs. You've gone across to the Olympic Games. Did you think, I mean, obviously you were still keen to go in 2012. You're obviously still pretty keen to keep going. How confident were you about your chances in 2008 after having won a world championship?
Okay, so I was confident straight after the World Indoors, but then things started to change in our event. Some of the intersex athletes started to come out and be a little bit more prevalent. So the event just went bang. The Russians started to cheat a bit more. Yeah. And the whole event changed. And so I knew going into those Olympics, it was going to be a really big ask. I almost decided to run the 400 before those games because I qualified for both, and I was probably running better over 400 meters and it was a bit more open. But I just really wanted to make the semi-final and do as well as I can, as I could. But it was a tough Olympics. It was a really tough Olympics.
Are we on top of the transgender situation or still a long way to go in the sport of athletics?
No, World Athletics has really addressed it. And it's been a hard one for them to address because there's no winners in it. The intersex athletes, it's not their fault with the way that they are born. And but then again, you're trying to make that level playing field, make it as fair as possible in terms of an Olympic Games, and so that everybody feels like they come into it feeling like they have the best chance possible to do as well as they can with training. And I think that's why they've got separate categories, female and male, in track and field. But it's a tough one. It's a really tough one. But World Athletics has made that tough decision, and they have put the rules in place that do make it different to back in the day when I was competing.
Tamsyn Manou is my guest for Dashing Gans Olympic Adventures for Aussie Homeloans. You mentioned before you were 16 when you went to Victoria, Canada, the Commonwealth Games in 1994. You were selected to be part of the relay. You didn't get a run, but what was that experience like for a schoolgirl from MLC in Melbourne, Tamsyn?
Yeah, no, it was certainly different to doing maths at high school. That's for sure.
Did you have to do it away though from the track? You had to keep up your homework, I'm sure.
Yeah. No, I missed a whole term of school because I went to Portugal for the World Under-20s before that, and then traveled to Canada for the Commonwealth Games. It was really hard. I was possibly too young to go on that trip. I was only 15, turned 16 in Portugal at the day one of the World Under-20s. And I was a young 16-year-old, but how do you tell a 16-year-old that they're not going to go to a Commonwealth Games when they're picked? I think these days it's really different. You have a little bit better support in place for the youngsters who make teams. But back then it was a little bit like surviving and trying to work it all out for myself. There's things that made it tough, and I possibly didn't want to compete in the sport for much after it when I got back, because it was tough. It was really tough being with the senior athletes. And as I got older, I began to understand it more. Like I was trying to take a position off athletes who were more senior and had done a lot more training than me. So athletics can be brutal. It's competitive environment. You're going to race off for a 4x4 spot, and there was 5 or 6 of us that wanted it. So I learned the hard way that you go out there and you race, and if it doesn't go your way, you're the one sitting in the stands watching, and that was devastating for me. I really struggled with it at the age of 16. But the flip side of it was I got to meet athletes like Cathy Freeman and see how she went about it, and watch, in Canada in 1994, she was amazing. She won the double gold in the 200, 400, the way she went about it, her friendly nature, the way she's so respectful and humble. There was a lot that I took away from it that I think helped me become not only tough. I was a really tough athlete, I think, in terms of being able to compete on the start line and really race hard, but also understanding that respect side of things is really important too.
You've mentioned Cathy Freeman. You were there, obviously, in 2000. Your first Olympic Games would have been a great experience, a home Olympic Games. What do you remember about a race, and how nervous were you for her?
Oh, I was really nervous because we traveled around Europe together before those Olympics, and I'd seen the pressure that she was under. I also saw how much people loved her and were really wanting her to win. And that was cool, but it was also a lot of pressure. We roomed together, so I had that beautiful time that I got to spend with her, just her and I in the room, and really understand what she was going through and see it firsthand. I don't think actually anybody could understand what she was going through, but I got to see it. And then to be able to be sitting in the crowd for that final night alongside Peter Fortune, he, bizarrely enough, I would have thought he would have been the most nervous, but he was calm. He was really calm. No, it was so nerve-wracking to watch, seeing not only a great athlete who had the weight of the whole nation on her shoulders, but a friend to go out there and have to deal with that. It was tough to watch, but she's such a champion. I don't think any of us doubted that she'd get the job done, but it was still nerve-wracking to watch. And it was just a surreal moment in time to be able to be in that stadium. And I think a lot of people in Australia who were alive at that time will always know where they were. And I'm just the same as everybody else. I think it was brilliant, absolute brilliant moment in Australian history. And what an athlete. We're so lucky as Australians to have her as an icon of our sport. And she's brilliant on and off the track.
Any regrets, Tamsyn, you and Jan are approaching officials after the 2006 Com Games, when it appeared, and it ended up being correct, that the British runner had done the wrong thing regarding the final of the 4x400 metres relay?
I really regret that moment. 100% regret it, because I knew the rules and I knew that it was automatically disqualified. And we finished the race. There was a whole heap of the crowd yelling, cheering. We got a medal. I was wrapped with the medal. We weren't meant to win, cross the line second and get a silver. Jamaica had had an issue. So we were wrapped, but I went over to the girls and I remember saying, we're going to win this because it's automatic disqualification. The English athlete had jumped in front of me.
Right.
Yeah, well, she just moved in front because her athlete was coming in. It's a lot of athletes have done it, but you're not allowed to. It's an automatic disqualification. Anyway, when I said it, I remember Jana turned to me, and she was one of our team leaders, and she said, "Oh, we should check if the officials saw it," which was you got so many emotions after a race. We were just having a conversation, and so Jana took me across the judges, and I was older, and I should have said, no, let's just stay here, because all eyes were on us. But you kind of block it all out and you forget. And I was thinking more about, I don't want people to think that Jana and I are fighting if I say no, because Jana and I were fine. And then, yeah, Yep, I should have been harder. I regret it. I should have just said, no, just let it play out, because all we did was go up to officials and say, did you see it? And they said, yeah, we saw, they said something along the lines of, yep. And then we walked away. Like,
Right.
would never have put in a protest, would never have got them disqualified, just asked if they'd seen it. But do I regret going over? 100%, because those English girls, devastating for them that they were disqualified. I was horrified that they would have thought that, we went and got them disqualified. All that mattered to me, even after the press of all of it, was that the English athletes knew that that's not the way we would go about our sport. I certainly still feel bad about that moment. Would I change that night? 100%, yeah.
Two more before I let you go. It's great having Tamsyn Manou, part of Dashing Down's Olympic Adventures for Aussie Home Loans. They've got over 25 lenders on their panel. What have you learned from the great, and I call him the immortal, Bruce McAvaney, in regard to broadcasting athletics? You've done 2 Olympic Games with him. You've got another one coming up with Gerard Whateley, who's an excellent broadcaster as well, but hasn't called the athletics at an Olympic Games yet. But what have you learned from Bruce? I'm sure plenty.
Oh, Bruce is brilliant. I mean, talk about being spoilt with having the best mentors in the sport. I had Kathy Freeman, Seb Coe, Daley Thompson in athletics. And then from there, I've gone straight into the broadcast meter and got Bruce McAvaney to help me learn my caper. So he's so giving of his time. He's brilliant at what he does. He's well-researched, but he also is so knowledgeable. I'm going to miss him. He's brilliant, absolutely brilliant broadcaster, and his passion for athletics is just second to none. So he's fantastic. I think everyone will miss having him call, but he certainly has said that Jared's going to do a great job, and I've met with Jared, and I'm looking forward to working with him as well.
I take it preparation was one of Bruce's keys. You've learned a lot from him regarding that, because when I've been speaking to you trying to organise this, and I thank you for finding time today. I'm happy to do it, Dan, but I've got my head in my athletics books and athletics information. I'm sure Bruce has told you prep, and keep prepping, Tamsyn.
Oh, it's a lot. Like, here's my book. Like,
Yeah.
I get an A4 book, and
Yes.
I do the men's and women's track events, and I do 20 to 30 backstories on every event, and it takes a long time. But I was just as nervous at Rio for my first Olympics as a broadcaster, because we were about to go on air, and I thought, oh my goodness, if I stuff this up, I make Bruce look bad. So I was really nervous. But research is everything.
Yeah, you didn't, Tamsyn. You did a great job, and you continue to do a great job. That's why they keep asking you back. It's something that's very natural to you, isn't it?
I really like highlighting the athletes' backstories and their hardships to get to that start line, and really trying to make them the stars of the show, because it's all about them. I really enjoy that.
Excellent.
I do. I enjoy highlighting their stories and being able to tell them and bring them to life for the public to learn, not just about their stats, but also about who they are as humans. No, I really enjoy that.
Even though, and you mentioned earlier, Australia a good chance of going quite well. Are the 100, 200, the 100 metres for men and women still the big events, like the grand final of the track and field, even though Australia probably not likely to feature?
I mean, some people argue it's the 1500, right? But no, I think the 100 meter, to be able to say that you're the fastest person on the planet, male or female, I think that's always pretty cool at an Olympic Games. Yeah. And
Excellent.
doing the backstories of the 100 meters, men and women, it's going to be incredible races, really incredible. Some real characters running in that 100 meters for both the men and women. And I think the Americans are the one to watch. I think Noah Lyles and Sha'Carri Richardson, if they cross the line in first, I think you're going to see big celebrations from them both. And I think it'll be a very entertaining 100-meter race.
And can I ask you about your husband, Graham? He played one test for Australia, the third test of the 2009 Ashes series at Headingley. Unfortunately, it was disrupted by rain. You went over there to support him with the rest of the Australian ladies who were there to support their men, whether they were partners or wives. What was that experience like, being over there and knowing that you're an elite athlete yourself, but she's on the other foot, if you like, supporting your partner in his chosen sport at the highest level?
Oh, hearing that Graham had made that test team. I was in Stockholm, actually. And
so you weren't even in London, Tamsyn.
No, I was in Stockholm running in the Diamond League with a friend of mine, the late great Dave Baxter, who was a sprinter for Australia as well.
Yeah.
And he called me and he told me he was in the team. Oh no, actually Seb Coe called me.
Yeah.
And he said, I'm in a bar somewhere and how good is it that Graham's playing? And I went and I argued with Seb for 5 minutes saying he's not playing because Brad Haddon was playing. And I had just spoken to Graham and Graham was the emergency. And Seb's going, I've seen the team and your husband is playing. Great. Well, he's my boyfriend at the time. Graham is playing. Graham is there. And Seb knew Graham and knows Graham. So argued back and forth for 5 minutes, got off the phone telling him he was wrong. And then Graham called me and he said, oh, I'm playing because unfortunately Brad hurt his, and Graham being Graham said it in such a nice way. He was sort of like, oh, because poor Brad's hurt his hand in the warm-up, so I'm playing. So I was like, oh my goodness, this is so exciting. Not for Brad, obviously. I felt for him, but for Graham, it was super exciting. And I got on the plane and went straight across, drove up the motorway, and it was just surreal because it was so brilliant to see him go out there. And he played so well. He did such a good job. And it wasn't, I mean, if he was nervous, he certainly didn't show it. It was fantastic. The Barmy Army were chanting, who are you, as he walked out. And he just took it all with a grain of salt and went out there. And it was such a wonderful experience. It was one of the highlights of my life, watching him go out there and get that baggy green and play cricket for Australia, because I know how hard he worked. He chose the position, which is super hard to get a go at, being the wicket keeper. But yeah, no, it was awesome. It was really, really awesome. And Ricky Ponting, he's just brilliant. I remember from that trip, it was my birthday, and him and Rihanna, they sang me happy birthday with the rest of the team. And as a sports tragic, they won't understand this, but as a sports tragic who's grown up watching football, cricket, everything, that was awesome. That just was the best. Having the Australian cricket captain and the team sing me happy birthday was like one of my sporting highlights of my life.
And I think full credit must be given to Andrew Strauss, because the team was already in and Brad was in the team. And then I think he was doing a few warm-ups and they found out they were bowling and he hurt his finger. And then Ricky's gone over to Andrew Strauss and said, look, Brad's hurt his finger. Can Graham Manou play? Yeah, no problems. You need to have a wicket keeper. So he's basically gone outside the rules of the game, but in the spirit of the game, he's done the right thing. So thoroughly deserved. He only played the one test, as you say. It's pretty hard, but one is better than none, isn't it, Tamsyn?
Always. And I think that, a biased life here. I think he's very unlucky to not have played more, because he was a fantastic wicket keeper. The things that he could do with those gloves was awesome to watch him when he was at his prime.
Tamsyn, it's been a great pleasure chatting to you. Looking forward to hearing you at the Olympic Games in Paris. Safe travels, should be absolutely fantastic. You've had a great career, of which you should be very proud of, and I really appreciate you joining me for Dashing Dan's Olympic Adventures for Aussie Home Loans. Their areas of expertise include purchasing a property, owner-occupied or investment, building a property portfolio, refinancing, debt consolidation, cash out, construction, pre-approvals, first home buyers, equipment loans, car loans and personal loans. And obviously with your two children into sport, considering your parents were great sports people and grandparents, great sports people as well. You're a taxi driver a lot now, Tamsyn, too. Is that right?
I am. They play every sport under the sun. So it'll be interesting to see which sport they end up in. Watch this space.
Good on you, Tamsyn. Thanks for joining us, and safe travels, and have a great time in Paris. I'm sure you will. Looking forward to watching you and listening to you at the Olympic Games in a few weeks' time.
Thanks, Dan.